Hello, world, and welcome to the In My Footsteps podcast. I am Christopher Setterlin, coming to you from the vacation destination known as Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and this is episode 256. It's going to be kind of a throwback episode of the podcast, looking back to the old days, very Cape Cod centric. We are going to start it off with a look back 40 years at the release of the classic comedy One Crazy Summer, filmed on Cape Cod, and we'll look at the connection between the movie and the Cape. We're going to go way back in the day and look at the creation of the cellular phone and its history up through the 1990s. There's going to be a brand new top 5 as we look back at the top 5 movies filmed on Cape Cod or the islands of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. How many of these did you know were filmed on the Cape? And there's going to be a brand new This Week in History and Time capsule going back hundreds and hundreds of years to the beginning of the construction of the Leaning Tower of Pisa in Italy. All of that is coming up right now on episode 256 of the In My Footsteps podcast. It is hot, sweltering, soupy outside. Welcome to summer, like it just started. Wherever you are, I hope you're staying cool. I hope you've got AC in front of you, or maybe a bag full of ice cubes sitting on your head. On the day I'm recording this podcast, I spent the morning bringing my car in to get some work done on its exhaust. It was in the mid to upper 80s. I decided that while the car was getting worked on, I would go walk on the nearby rail trail. I ended up walking more than 10 miles, spending more than 3 hours out in the heat with the heat index of over 100. Only to get back and find out that my car needed a little more work, so I've got to bring it back in next week. So I'll do it all over again. So if I sound like I'm half dead by the time this podcast ends, it's because my body is just like a crumbling burnt piece of bacon after my walk. But I will power through because you have all tuned in expecting to hear some fun Gen X nostalgia and pop culture, and I've got loads of it. I know the Leaning Tower of Pisa is not exactly Gen X. Going back that far, would it be like Gen A or Gen B? Of course, you know I can't start off my podcast without thanking my biggest backers, my biggest supporters, my Patreon supporters. Thank you so much to Lori, Mary Lou, Ashley, Kevin, Leo, Marguerite, Neglectoid, Crystal, Matt, Dr. Shrimp Porto Chico. You are my biggest supporters. You literally put your money where your mouth is to support me, my podcast, my content, my never-ending quest to be a full-time, self-employed content creator. You too can become a supporter on Patreon. I have various tiers that will allow you to get shouted out on the podcast. But I'm appreciative of all of you that tune into the show weekly, or if this is your first time ever hearing the show. This week here, when the podcast goes live, it marks the end of the fundraiser for The Cabin, my feature-length film debut that I am producing. Because a little over 2 weeks from now, I'll be traveling, going on location to shoot this picture while Mark Polonia is the director, so he'll probably be shooting. I'll be doing my best to be supportive in the background. So I wanted to take a moment just to thank everybody who donated, everybody who shared the fundraiser. I know it's a lot to ask for people to part with their hard-earned money to support me. So I'm so grateful to those who did, and those of you who shared that might have led to other donations. I'm so grateful to all of you. And don't worry, there'll be loads of content from behind the scenes of The Cabin. And there will probably be 1, maybe 2 mixtape episodes of the podcast just while I'm on location. If I'm doing 12-hour days of shooting, I don't know if I'll have time to record the podcast. But that's still a ways away. Let us stick to the present by going back to the past. A little bit of a throwback episode here of the podcast, very Cape Cod centric. So let's start off episode 256 with a look back 40 years this week at the release of the comedy film classic that was shot on Cape Cod, One Crazy Summer. You may have heard of one hot summer or many hot summers like this one we're currently going through. But one crazy summer? Well, you probably had those as well, especially when we were younger. But in the film world, it was 40 years ago this week that there was one crazy summer that was filmed on Cape Cod and the islands. If I was to ask you to name the movie you think is most synonymous with being filmed on Cape Cod or the islands, I know what you would say. It's Jaws. Not to spoil the top 5 that's coming up, but Jaws is on that list. But for us who grew up in the 1980s, there's another film that deserves equal recognition. One Crazy Summer had quirky humor, memorable characters, and the unmistakable New England atmosphere. Well, for those people that may have never heard of One Crazy Summer, people my age, you probably know it falls into a kind of category with a lot of different movies, like the classics like Breakfast Club, Ferris Bueller, Summer Rental, Great Outdoors. I might also say Back to School, Better Off Dead. Mindless fun movies from the 1980s. One Crazy Summer is at the top of that list. It was released on August 8th, 1986, directed by Savage Steve Holland. The gist of it combines absurd comedy, cartoon-style visual gags, coming-of-age romance, there's slapstick, and an unmistakable sense of place. Even if you didn't know it was filmed a lot on Cape Cod, it looks like it. A lot of people think it was mostly filmed on Nantucket, but that's not true. For residents of Cape Cod from the time, of which I was one, this film is more than just that mindless 80s comedy. It's a cinematic time capsule of how our home looked back during the summer of 1985 when this movie was filmed. The movie stars John Cusack as Hoops McCann, who is an aspiring cartoonist struggling with the recent death of his grandfather.
Saturday night at the corner cafe.
Once upon a time, there was a lonely kind of a guy who would resign himself to the fact that love was blind.
Looking for a fresh start, he spends the summer on a Massachusetts island with his eccentric grandmother. There he meets a cast of characters, including Cassandra Eldridge, played by Demi Moore, Egg Stork, played by the wild and crazy Bobcat Goldthwait, and George Calamari, played by Joel Murray. The trio becomes involved in a battle against the wealthy Beckerstead family, who are attempting to force local residents to sell their homes through intimidation and financial manipulation. It is interesting 40 years later, the idea of rich people buying up all the homes to create their McMansions. It's more reality than I wish it was on Cape Cod. Savage Steve Holland had previously directed Better Off Dead. His idea was, rather than creating realistic comedies, he wanted live-action movies that felt like cartoons. Now granted, there's animation in this movie, Hoops' cartoons, but for the most part, there are these memorable scenes that seem like they could have been out of cartoons. I will share some of my favorites later. Holland's trademarks included animated doodles, visual sound effects, impossible slapstick, exaggerated villains, and surreal humor. It was his background as a cartoonist that heavily influenced his directing style, and that style is everywhere in One Crazy Summer. The main cast was led by John Cusack, who by 1986, he was quickly becoming the face of intelligent teen comedies. One Crazy Summer completed an unofficial trilogy with 16 Candles and Better Off Dead. He had an understated delivery that worked perfectly around the increasingly insane world that he was living in. You had Demi Moore as Cassandra, and this was released just before she became one of the biggest Hollywood stars. Within a few years, Demi Moore starred in About Last Night, Ghost, and A Few Good Men. It's like if she had starred in those movies first, she never would have been in One Crazy Summer. As much as I love the movie, she'd have been like, nah. Bobcat Goldthwait, he's probably the film's biggest scene stealer. He's loud, unpredictable, hyperactive, but yet strangely lovable, which is kind of like what he was in real life, at least I think back then. There are so many memorable scenes in One Crazy Summer. Most people probably think of the culmination of the strange regatta at the end with the homemade boats, including giant animals, bizarre mechanical creations, floating sculptures, with Hoops and his friends ultimately competing in a boat shaped like a gigantic Godzilla-style monster. I don't remember the exact quote, but my friend Greg, who hopefully he's listening, shout out if you are, he's told me that he was on the breakwaters when this scene was being filmed. I believe it was Sassuat Harbor in East Dennis. I think I remember asking him if he remembered anything about that scene, and he's like, no, I was just sitting on the jetty watching these boats go by. I mean, I think it would have been a big deal, but you're looking at, we would have been 8 years old at the time. Yes, I have plenty of memories from that point, but they're all kind of hazy. After the regatta, the most memorable thing might be the animation, where Hoops' drawings literally come to life. These animations were hand-drawn by Savage Steve Holland himself, which was unusual in Hollywood at the time. Rather than relying on expensive special effects, Holland integrated simple cartoon illustrations that perfectly matched the quirky style. Just a few of my favorite scenes in the movie, besides the regatta, which is always fun, there is Bobcat Goldthwait in the Godzilla suit rampaging through a miniature town, and him just that scream that he does. Yes, that's it. There's the guy that gets buried up to his neck on the beach, and someone comes and puts a chair over his head, this big guy, and he's eating all this food, and then he starts eating chili, and he's like ripping farts on his head, and they have to get the ambulance. He's like half dead as they dig him out.
Oh no, not those. Oh no! Oh, please, your enormous is anything but chili.
Hey, far out, dead men on the beach. Come here.
The one that stuck out to me the most, though, are the two little girls that make the faces, pulling down their eyes and grabbing at their mouths, and that crossing guard says, ooh, if you keep doing that with your face, if someone hits you on the back, they'll stay like that. And then someone does, and their faces stay like that, and the movie's just them scaring people just by showing up.
Girls, you know if you make faces like that and somebody slaps you on the back, you'll stay that way forever.
I think part of the problem, not for the movie itself, but with critics and such, is they didn't know what to make of this movie. Because it wasn't like a lot of the teen comedies of the era. It wasn't so much crude humor. It was sight gags, visual comedy, physical humor, absurd dialogue, running jokes like the girls' faces. One Crazy Summer is 45% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes and was not a big hit at the box office, making $13 million on a budget of $9 million. So maybe I'm talking about it and a lot of you are like, that movie wasn't anything special. I think because it was filmed a lot on Cape Cod, it gives it more cachet with me. So although the story is set on Nantucket, large portions of the movie were filmed on Cape Cod itself. One of the film's earliest scenes occurs at the Woods Hole Steamship Authority ferry. The characters board that ferry there, and one memorable stunt features a motorcycle flying off the dock into the water. There were several scenes filmed in Hyannis, using the Hyannis West Elementary School, what is now the St. Pope John Paul II High School in Hyannis. There was a memorable gas station sequence filmed in Falmouth at Garrett's Family Market on Route 28. And of course, with it being set on Nantucket, there were a lot of exterior scenes on the island, beaches, harbors, neighborhood streets, the cobblestone streets, the gray shingle homes, historic downtown and the harbor of Nantucket. It still is just perfect scenery. So 40 years ago, it was even better. The big reason that Cape Cod was perfect for filming One Crazy Summer was that 40 years ago, it still looked traditional. like you would think of old Cape Cod. There were fewer chain businesses, fewer luxury developments. The harbors and marinas were still the old school ones. You still had a lot of the weathered cottages. And yes, if you look hard enough on Cape Cod, you can find all of that stuff still now. But it's sadly also easier to see all these giant second homes from these rich people that come down here and just clog up our shoreline. I don't hate the chain restaurant and chain businesses that are down here, but I do wish there were more mom and pop places. Even if you aren't a fan of the movie itself, watching One Crazy Summer is like opening a 40-year-old photo album from Cape Cod. You had a lot of Cape Cod residents appearing as extras. Like I said, my friend Greg, I don't know if he was made an extra or if he just showed up. You had schools, neighborhoods, and businesses that were temporarily transformed into movie sets. For many locals, One Crazy Summer remains a point of pride because it captured everyday Cape life before this place started to change in the last few decades. I still love Cape Cod, and I can find the nooks and crannies that look like it did when I was a kid, but even I would be foolish not to admit that it's changed. I miss just that look of old Cape Cod. Luckily, I can find old videos and home movies from 40 years ago with the local storefronts and the period road signs, vintage automobiles, uncrowded roads, or at least less than now. Today, I believe One Crazy Summer enjoys a much stronger reputation than it did when it came out 40 years ago. Like I said, people didn't know what to make of it, and now it's, I guess, one of those quote-unquote cult classics. It's appreciated for the unique visual style, endless quotable humor, the lovable oddball characters, and big time the nostalgic portrayal of New England summers. For those of us that grew up on Cape Cod, or might have had deep family roots here, or even just visited, One Crazy Summer offers something beyond nostalgia. It captures a version of the Cape before heavy traffic, large-scale development, and the modern tourism boom that has changed things in the last 20 years. 4 decades later, One Crazy Summer remains more than a cult comedy. It's one of the finest cinematic snapshots of Cape Cod and Nantucket in the mid-1980s. A colorful, funny, and surprisingly valuable time capsule of coastal Massachusetts at a moment that has largely disappeared. This week in history, we are going back 853 years to August 9th, 1173, and the beginning of construction on the Tower of Pisa in Italy. Few buildings in history have become famous because they were built exactly as intended. The Leaning Tower of Pisa became famous because almost everything went wrong. For more than 850 years, the tower has leaned farther and farther toward the ground, while surviving wars, earthquakes, weather, neglect, and even human attempts to straighten it. During the 11th and 12th centuries, Pisa was one of Europe's most powerful maritime republics, along with Venice and Genoa. Its wealth came from shipping, naval power, trade with the Byzantine Empire. By the late 1100s, Pisa wanted a cathedral complex that would rival anything in Europe. The city had already constructed a magnificent cathedral, a baptistry, a cemetery, and the final piece would be an enormous freestanding bell tower. Work began in 1173, with historians still debating who exactly designed the tower. Possible names include Bonanno Pisano, Diotti Salvi, and Gerardo di Gerardo. I think I pronounced all of those right. The tower in Pisa was intended to be about 184 feet tall, a bell tower, cylindrical, 8 stories, white marble, decorated with graceful arcades and columns. Construction had barely reached the 3rd floor before disaster struck. The problem wasn't the tower, but the ground beneath it. Pisa is built on clay, fine sand, marine deposits, and soft silt. Even worse, the foundation was only about 10 feet deep, and for a structure weighing more than 14,000 tons, this was disastrously shallow. As workers added more weight, one side of the soil compressed faster than the other, then the tower began sinking and leaning. Work halted in 1178, and due to military conflicts with neighboring cities, construction remained stopped for nearly a century. But the irony was that the long delay might have saved the tower because the soil beneath it slowly compressed and stabilized. Had builders kept on building, the tower might have collapsed. Around 1272, architect Giovanni di Simone resumed work, and instead of tearing down the Tower of Pisa, he built the upper floor slightly taller on one side, therefore giving the tower a subtle curve. So the correction reduced but didn't eliminate the lean. What's crazy is work was finally completed around 1372, which meant it was almost 200 years. And here I am complaining about them rebuilding the Bass River Bridge down the street from me. It's supposed to take 5 to 6 years. You imagine if it took 200 years? I mean, I guess I wouldn't care. I'd be dead. But it didn't take 200 years because of the engineering difficulty. It was wars, political instability, financial interruptions. The completed tower is considered one of the masterpieces of the Romanesque architecture. It stands about 186 feet tall on the high side and 183 feet on the low side, weighing approximately 14,500 tons, 294 to 296 steps depending on the entrance you use, a wall thickness at the base of nearly 13 feet. I'm sure the question you're asking is, if it's leaning, why does it not fall? The answer lies in an unexpected phenomenon called dynamic soil structure interaction. Because the tower is heavy, rigid, and built on soft soil, the ground actually helps absorb earthquake energy. The tower went from leaning around 1.4 degrees in 1350 to more than 5.5 degrees in 1990. The top had shifted more than 15 feet from vertical. In 1990, the tower was closed, considered too dangerous, and it remained closed for 11 years while engineers eventually helped kind of straighten the tower a little bit by removing soil. Eventually, the lean was reduced by roughly 40 centimeters at the top, and currently the angle is just under 4 degrees. The Leaning Tower of Pisa has become a universal symbol of Italy. It appears in films, TV shows, cartoons, and advertisements, and obviously travel campaigns. It is one of history's most remarkable examples of unintended success. It should have fallen long ago, but it has not. And the construction on the beloved, iconic Leaning Tower of Pisa began 853 years ago this week in history. Now for the new time capsule, we're going to stick to that same date, August 9th, 1173. There was no number one song or movie or TV show or radio. I'm kidding. We're not going to do that date. We're coming forward in time a lot. We're going to go 45 years ago to August 13th, 1981. What was going on in the world of pop culture back then? Well, let's find out. The number one song was Jessie's Girl by Rick Springfield. This song was off of his album Working Class Dog. This was Springfield's only number one hit, spending 2 weeks there. He did have 4 more top 10 songs, but he probably had more success outside of music as character Noah Drake on the daytime soap opera General Hospital. That being said, Rick Springfield has sold more than 25 million albums worldwide. The number one movie was Raiders of the Lost Ark, and you could get into the theater with a ticket costing $2.78. Back in episode 248, I did a full segment about Raiders of the Lost Ark for its 45th anniversary of its release. It is the introduction of the Indiana Jones character played by Harrison Ford. The film is 94% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes and was a massive hit, making $390 million on a budget of $20 million. That box office is equal to about $1.4 billion when adjusted for inflation to 2026. The number one TV show was The Dukes of Hazzard. Well, this is one of the OG favorite shows of my childhood. We're talking Dukes of Hazzard, we're talking Knight Rider. This is a classic show about Bo and Luke Duke, the General Lee, their car, the orange 1969 Dodge Charger, Daisy Duke, who her short jeans turned a lot of little boys into men. Not me. Uncle Jesse, Boss Hogg, and Roscoe P. Coltrane. The show was on for 7 seasons and 147 episodes between 1979 and 1985. The less we say about the Coy and Vance era of Dukes of Hazzard, the better. And if you were around back then, August 13th, 1981, maybe you just came from seeing Raiders of the Lost Ark, you're on your way home to watch Dukes of Hazzard, but you gotta stop off and get a few things. Well, you're in luck because there's a lot of great deals at Caldor, their white sale dollar days. Aquanet hairspray for $1. Most 80s women would need like 15 of those per week. 25% off Wrangler corduroy jeans. They make that noise when you rub your legs together. Plump bed pillows for $2.76. That's what they say in the ad. And loads of back-to-school savings on crayons, glue, pencils. At this point in 1981, there were 69 Caldor stores. Closest one to Cape Cod was probably the Brighton one, so I never went to Caldor. But that'll wrap up another time capsule, another This Week in History. Let's take a stroll back to Cape Cod. We have a brand new top 5 as we look at the top 5 movies filmed on the Cape or the islands. How many of these did you know were filmed down here? Boy, Cape Cod is getting represented more in this episode of the podcast than in a long time. It just worked out that way. One crazy summer, 40 years ago this week, and then it segues perfectly into a top 5 where we look at movies that were filmed on Cape Cod or the islands of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. One movie that was set on Cape Cod but not filmed here was Summer Catch from 2001. It was a romantic comedy set against the backdrop of the Cape Cod Baseball League. It's all good. The movie stunk. It's 8% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. I'm glad they didn't disgrace Cape Cod by filming it here. But as with most of these top 5s, they're in no particular order. I've got a whole bunch of honorable mentions. So let us dive into some classics and some not-so-classics that were filmed on Cape Cod or the islands. We'll start with the honorable mentions, and they begin with the movie Tony. This is the Anthony Bourdain biopic that actually was released last week from when this podcast goes live. I auditioned to be one of the kitchen people in it. I did not get the part, but that's fine. Time will tell if this ends up being a classic movie or one that we just kind of cast aside. I think it's going to be a classic, but that's me. Obviously, another honorable mention is One Crazy Summer. If you don't know about it, just rewind the podcast, listen to that segment again. It's got clips of the foolishness. Another honorable mention is Stuck on You. This is from 2003. It stars Matt Damon and Greg Kinnear as conjoined twins. It was filmed a little bit on Vineyard Haven on Martha's Vineyard and some aerial shots of Cape Cod. Another honorable mention is To Jillian on her 37th birthday. This is from 1996. It stars Michelle Pfeiffer and Claire Danes, among others. This is only 15% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, but it was filmed a lot on Nantucket, including Brant Point and Eel Point Road. And the final honorable mention is Year by the Sea. This is from 2016. And is an independent comedy drama starring Karen Allen, who ironically was in Raiders of the Lost Ark. See, everything comes back around. For this, you had a lot of the Outer Cape, Orleans, Eastham, Wellfleet, but then also Chatham, Brewster, and Dennis. And there was even a special opening of the movie at the famed Cape Cinema in Dennis. So those are the honorable mentions for movies filmed on the Cape or Islands. Have you seen any of those? Did you know they were all filmed down here? Well, let's get into the actual top 5, starting it off with one that I'm almost guaranteed that none of you will even know of. It's the obscure type of thing that me who does this research would find just to stump you. So, movies filmed on the Cape or Islands, number 1 is Rip Van Winkle. This movie was begun in 1896 and finished in 1903, so I wouldn't expect any of you to know that. I only know it because Joseph Jefferson, the actor in it, had a home in Buzzards Bay on Cape Cod. Before any of you say, oh, Buzzards Bay's on the other side of the canal. Yeah, well, back in 1896, there was no canal, so yay. If you go to the Aptuxet trading post in Bourne, at the entrance, there's this big kind of light blue windmill that was a gift to Joseph Jefferson. So much of this short, silent film was shot around his property in Buzzards Bay. What's incredible is that Joseph Jefferson made a living as an actor off of playing Rip Van Winkle for more than 40 years. Just imagine going back to Raiders of the Lost Ark. If Harrison Ford, all he ever did was Indiana Jones movies for 40 years. Be like, okay, enough with this. Can't you do anything else? But back in the late 1800s, I guess no one thought about it. Number 2 is Jaws. I couldn't have it be number 1. That was too predictable. This is the 1975 all-time classic, one of the best movies ever, about the man-eating great white shark that's terrorizing the beachgoers at Amity Island. So much of this was shot on Martha's Vineyard, downtown Edgartown, the famed Jaws Bridge where the shark swims into the pond, Menemsha Village where Quint works when the orca goes out. There's not much that I can say about this that hasn't been said before, but if you're looking for a more in-depth segment, I did one for the 50th anniversary of the film back in episode 201. And if you were wondering, yes, parts of Jaws 2 were filmed on Martha's Vineyard, but because of production delays and scheduling issues, a lot of the movie was filmed in Florida. Number 3 is The Finest Hours. This is a 2016 action thriller. It used Chatham Lighthouse. It's the story of the rescue of the crew of the SS Pendleton, which happened off of Chatham in February 1952. The film stars Casey Affleck, Chris Pine, Eric Bana, among others. Although it did all right with critics, it was a bomb at the box office, making only $52 million on a budget between $70 and $80 million. The actual story itself is incredible. I highly recommend reading and learning about it. And if you're on Cape Cod during the summer, the lifeboat that rescued the crew of the Pendleton, CG-36500, is docked at Rock Harbor in Orleans, so you can actually see it. I've gone and seen it plenty of times, so I highly recommend it during summer. Number 4 is Sabrina. Speaking of Harrison Ford, this is a 1995 film starring him. It is a romantic comedy drama. The towns of Chilmark and Vineyard Haven were used in this movie. It is a remake of the 1954 Billy Wilder film of the same name, which starred Humphrey Bogart and Audrey Hepburn. The movie was a modest hit, making $87 million on a budget of somewhere around $58 million. So it did all right. That cannot be said for the final one. Number 5, That's My Boy. I love Adam Sandler, but yeesh. This is a 2012 comedy starring Adam Sandler, who was raised in Manchester, New Hampshire after moving there at the age of 6, so he's kind of local. The movie also stars Andy Samberg. It's about teenage Adam Sandler fathering a son and raising him, and then after years of estrangement, they get back together. This movie was filmed a lot locally. Harwich at the Weechmere Beach Club, Osterville and Barnstable, Edgartown and Oak Bluffs on Martha's Vineyard, So it's got the local connection, but it did not succeed at the box office. It's 20% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, so not as bad as Jack and Jill, but still. It made about $58 million on a budget of around 70, so it lost money, sadly. It is interesting to look back at the top 5 and the honorable mentions and see that the vast majority of them didn't do well at the box office. It's like, yay, thanks. All you come down and film on the Cape and Islands and then your movies don't do well. That's why we're counting on you, Tony. Jaws is an all-time classic, so it probably negates a lot of these. But there you have it. Top 5 movies that were filmed on the Cape or the Islands and the honorable mentions. How many of these have you seen? Have you gone to visit filming locations from these movies? Any trip to Martha's Vineyard needs to have Jaws locations. Chappaquiddick Beach Club. Like I said, the Jaws Bridge, that's an easy one. Gayhead Lighthouse. We go from movies filmed on Cape Cod to the birth of the cell phone. I don't know how the segue goes there, but we are going to that. So let's look at how cell phones began and their introduction into society in the 20th century. My first cell phone that I owned, I bought in 2003. It was an LG flip phone, a mirror phone, a little silver nugget with an antenna. I had Cellular as my carrier. It's amazing to think that I've had cell phones for 23 years, and yet I was something like 26 when I got my first cell phone. I didn't have beepers or pagers. If I needed to find somebody, I just called on a landline or rode my bike or drove my car to their house and showed up unannounced. So I'm well aware that cell phones are relatively new, which is why when putting together this segment for the podcast, I wanted to look at the early days of the cell phone, not the overall development, how technology has changed in the last 15 years. I wanted the intro, the beginning chapter. Because think about it, for most of the 20th century, the idea of having a phone in your pocket was like a science fiction movie. When I was a kid, telephones were attached to walls, desks, kitchen counters. It was a huge deal when we got a cordless phone, or things like Star 69 and Caller ID, which really put a damper on me doing prank calls, but that's a different story. Going all the way back to the beginning, Alexander Graham Bell patented the telephone in 1876. This revolutionized communications, but it remained tethered by wires and cords for over 100 years. You needed to have a home phone, a business phone. You had to talk to a telephone operator way back in the day, or you had to find a public pay phone. If somebody was traveling, if they weren't near a phone, there was no practical way to call them. This would have been helpful in the 1920s and 30s when millions of Americans were driving. Police, taxi companies, utility workers, railroad employees, delivery services, they all needed communication while on the move. Long before there were cell phones, there were mobile radio systems. These systems worked similarly to two-way radios. You had police and fire, military, first responders, Coast Guard ships using it. But it was one-way communication, push-to-talk, extremely limited in range, and large and expensive. They weren't really phones. World War II dramatically advanced radio engineering, with improvements including miniaturized electronics, improved batteries, better antennas, frequency management, and portable communications. Many engineers who later pioneered mobile phones first gained experience designing these wartime radio systems. So without wartime research, cellular technology likely would have taken much longer to emerge. The real birth of cellular technology began inside Bell Laboratories, which was a research division of AT&T. During the 40s, Bell engineers recognized that traditional radio telephone systems could only support a handful of users because each conversation occupied an entire radio channel. Therefore, a completely new architecture was needed. This happened in 1947 when Bell Labs engineer Douglas Ring, along with colleagues including W. Ray Young, proposed that instead of one giant radio tower covering an entire city, there would be hundreds of smaller coverage areas known as cells. Each cell would have its own antenna, own transmitter, assigned radio frequencies, and when someone moved, the call would automatically transfer. One tower would hand the call to another, the conversation would continue uninterrupted. Today, every mobile phone still works on this same basic principle. The only problem was the technology required to make it practical didn't exist at the time. That's why the idea of a cell phone came in 1947, but commercial cell phones didn't arrive until the 1980s. You needed other technologies that had to mature first, like computers. You couldn't have those computers that were the size of closets trying to do cellular technology. You needed advancements in electronics. Vacuum tubes at the time were large, heavy, fragile, power-hungry. The invention of the transistor in 1947 and later integrated circuits made portable electronics possible. Even early batteries were enormous. Portable communication required lighter batteries. Think about how big your battery is in your cell phone. It's like a chip. There was also years of debate through the Federal Communications Commission about available frequencies, commercial licensing, technical standards, interference concerns. So you can see there was a lot that had to happen from 1947 to get cell phones to where they became. Shockingly, the first car phones came out in the late 40s and 1950s with mobile telephone service, but not cell phones. These systems installed radios in the car. Equipment often weighed over 80 pounds, with a radio transmitter, receiver, large antenna, control console, and a separate power supply. Making a call required connecting through a human operator. These calls were expensive and coverage was limited. In fact, AT&T introduced mobile telephone service in 1946. But it wasn't until the 1960s when they introduced improved mobile telephone service, which helped with automatic dialing, audio quality, improved reliability. But that still wasn't enough for cell phone technology. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, Bell Labs repeatedly requested additional spectrum from the FCC, but they proceeded cautiously, worrying about technical feasibility, frequency shortages, market demand. It was frustrating that it took so long, but it allowed the technology around it to improve before deploying cell phones on the country. Could you imagine if they had released a cell phone in the late 50s, early 60s with the technology they had? It would have failed so badly that they probably would have stopped even trying to make them. We'd be sitting here today probably with some kind of cell phone. They probably would have tried again, but I doubt I'd have my notes for the podcast on my smartphone that I'm looking at right now. Even though AT&T did a lot of the early legwork when it came to the cellular phone movement, it was Motorola that was the company that believed that truly portable phones, not just car phones, were the future. A man named Martin Cooper is seen as the father of the cell phone. He led Motorola's portable cellular development team. He figured rather than designing phones for cars, he wanted phones for people. On April 3rd, 1973, while standing on 6th Avenue in New York City, Martin Cooper placed the world's first public handheld cellular telephone call. The best part was that he called his chief competitor, Joel Engel of Bell Labs. Now, according to Cooper, he simply wanted Bell Labs to know Motorola had succeeded first. But this call became one of the most famous moments in communication history. The phone that Cooper carried and called on was the Motorola Dynatac prototype. Would you like to get one of these phones? It weighed 2.5 pounds. It was 10 inches long without the antenna. The battery life was 20 to 30 minutes of talk time. It took 10 hours to charge. It had no memory, no display, no camera, no internet, no text messaging, no nothing. It literally was if you had a cordless phone and you walked outside. That's about the same as it was. But it didn't matter. It represented almost 30 years worth of engineering achievement. And like I said a few minutes ago, the term cellular refers to the network, not the phone. It's because of all the different, hundreds of overlapping cells, which they have a base station, assigned frequencies, limited geographic coverage. It's because neighboring cells reuse frequencies without interfering with each other that millions of conversations can occur simultaneously. After that 1973 first call, there was still a lot of work that remained. Companies needed to build cell towers, switching centers, computerized control systems, manufacturing facilities. Meanwhile, regulators finalized standards, so it was getting closer and closer for a launch of cellular phones. In 1983, the United States officially launched commercial cellular telephone service. The first available handheld cell phone was the Motorola Dynatac 8000X. This was a major upgrade from the one that they used in 1973. It had 30 minutes of talk time, 8 hours of battery life, LED display, 30-number memory. It weighed under 2 pounds. How much would it have cost you to buy this cell phone in 1983? $3,995. That's equal to $13,394 when adjusted for inflation to 2026. So just when you think your smartphone is overpriced, imagine spending the equivalent of $13,000 for a phone that didn't have internet or texting or anything like that. It was just corporate executives, wealthy entrepreneurs, celebrities, government officials. They were the ones that had it. Because of its size, the Dynatac is the phone that earned the nickname the Brick. Movies throughout the 80s frequently featured the oversized cell phone as symbols of wealth and success. I'm sure loads of yuppies had them. From there, it was kind of off to the races. Throughout the 80s, carriers rapidly expanded coverage, more towers, better antennas, smaller phones, longer battery life, more competition.
Radio Shack keeps you in constant communication with their affordable, transportable cellular telephone.
Hello? Oh, yes, he's right here. It's for you.
Yes, I heard about the merger. Buy 100 shares.
The affordable, transportable cellular telephone. Only at Radio Shack.
Perhaps the greatest engineering achievement of the 80s was the miniaturization of these phones. They rapidly got smaller and smaller. Like I said, the one that I got in 2003, it was probably 3 inches long until you flipped it out, and it had an antenna, but still, I wouldn't want a brick. The competition that arose was companies like AT&T, but Motorola, Nokia, Panasonic, Mitsubishi, Ericsson, Siemens. The competition would help bring prices down. 30 years ago in 1996, you could get a really cheap basic cell phone for as low as $200. Now granted, a basic phone 30 years ago was very basic compared to what would be considered a basic smartphone.
Dead batteries are inconvenient. That's why Nokia makes wireless phones with more than 4 hours of talk time and 200 hours of standby time. Inspired technology with a human touch.
The next big thing that came out as far as technology with cellular phones was short message service, SMS, aka text messaging. The first SMS message was sent in December 1992. All the shorthand came from it. By the end of the 90s, billions of text messages were being exchanged annually. There were very few in the industry that had predicted that texting would become one of the defining features of mobile communication. It's like you got a telephone to not even use as a phone. It's like the interesting observation. You got a cell phone, but you don't talk on it, you text on it, which is just weird when you really think about it. Even though Motorola pioneered the handheld cellular phones, it was Nokia that became synonymous with the mobile boom of the 90s. Models like the 2110, 5110, 6110, they were global bestsellers. By the late 90s, Nokia was the world's leading mobile phone manufacturer. For me, it was after high school that cell phones entered kind of daily life. I mean, I didn't have one till later, but more and more people got them. They went from a luxury item to an everyday necessity for safety, emergencies, travel, business, personal convenience. Cell phones quickly became a cultural icon. Flip phones, extendable antennas, car phones, they were everywhere. TV, movies. That's why I wanted to stop this segment at the end of the 90s, because the 90s is really when cellular technology, we started the 90s with a lot of rotary phones, corded phones, and ended with loads of people having cell phones, pagers, beepers. By the end of 1999, tens of millions of Americans owned cellular phones. Text messaging had become commonplace. Phones were smaller than ever. Mobile communication became an expected part of everyday life. And then I'm sure a lot of you younger listeners know just how the cell phone, smartphone boom took off in the last 20 years. Mobile internet, cameras, GPS, apps, powerful handheld computers. That's what my iPhone is. But that's a little bit of a speed run, but not at the origins of cellular phones. When did you get your first cell phone? Like I said, mine was 2003. Was I late to the party? I'm sure that singular flip phone is somewhere in my mom's basement. It was amazing for me, though, to see the evolution of cell phones from bricks in cars that rich people had to something that's basically your whole world in your pocket. But until next week, that is going to wrap up episode 256 of the In My Footsteps podcast. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Thank you for making it to the end. I walked over 10 miles this morning, but I seem to have powered through the podcast. So thank you all for putting up with me. I think it was all right. If you enjoy my work, you can support me by becoming a member on Patreon. You can buy me a coffee. Those links are in the podcast notes. Obviously, sharing my work, my content means a lot. I promote my stuff all the time, but it's always beneficial when people who aren't me share my work. Podcasts, books, blogs, videos. I just keep on working. It's like building a bigger and bigger spider web so that you never know when someone's going to find something of yours. It's better to have thousands of things they could find than a couple. For example, tomorrow from when this podcast goes live, I was asked to become kind of a substitute and give a lecture at the Cape Cod Maritime Museum in Hyannis. The speakers they had there for their Roaring Twenties lecture series in the summer, I guess they backed out, pulled out. I was recommended as a suitable replacement by Cape Cod history icon Don Wilding, which that in and of itself is very humbling, and I'm very grateful for that. But they reached out last week and said, could you do a lecture? I have learned to say yes and figure it out later. So tomorrow, from when the podcast goes live, I'm going to be doing a lecture about what it was like to vacation on Cape Cod in the summer 100 years ago. Of course, that means I have to create the presentation since I don't have one, but that's fine. I was found to do this gig through all of the work I've done. I'm sure it's going to be a lot of fun too. I can't wait. Next week, the dog days of summer continue. It's going to be another awesome episode of the show. I can't wait. We're going to look back at the original Woodstock concert on the anniversary of when it happened in 1969. We're going to go back and look at the launch of the Super Nintendo Entertainment System and how that changed video gaming. And oh boy, I'll be all up in my feels as we look at the top 5 1990 celebrity crushes. Male and female, all the female ones are straight out of my life. So all that and more is coming up next week on episode 257 of the podcast. Again, thank you to everybody who has participated in the cabin fundraiser, whether sharing or donating. I am so excited for this opportunity to create a feature-length film. It's like opening a door in a totally different area of my life. Even as recently as 2 years ago, I never would have thought this was possible. I will be shooting loads of behind-the-scenes content to share while I'm on location, so you'll get a lot of that probably later in September. I'm just filled with a lot of gratitude towards all of the people that have had my back through all of this and more. My ride or dies as far as family and friends go. Because there were a lot of people that donated to the fundraiser that I never would take for granted, but I was kind of like, yes, of course, them. These were the people I knew would have my back. Because they've had my back through all of my books, through doing this podcast, through things in my personal life, giving up alcohol almost 6 years ago. I will never not be grateful, blessed, and humbled to have people like that in my life. And I wanted to make sure I said that. I know I say it sometimes, but you can never let the people that matter know they matter enough. But what I'm going to do now is start wrapping up so I can turn my AC back on. I never have it running during the show. And looking at the weather right now, the heat index is still 98 degrees. I'm not going to sing any of their songs, but yes. So until next time, remember, in this life, don't walk in anyone else's footsteps, create your own path, and enjoy every moment you can on this journey we call life, because you never know what tomorrow brings. This has been the In My Footsteps podcast. I am Christopher Setterlin. You already knew that. I'll talk to you all again soon.